Welcome to the Good Faith Podcast, where friends who follow Jesus help each other make sense of the world. I'm your host, Curtis Chang. This podcast is produced by a nonpartisan 501c3 organization. The Pope is having himself quite a moment. Pope Leo XIV has only been in his position for about a year, and in that short period, he has influenced the public conversation more than some previous popes have done in their entire tenures. One fascinating aspect of Pope Leo XIV's public engagement is his outsized impact on Protestants. Protestants originated out of a historic rejection of papal authority, and now Protestants like me are increasingly looking to him for guidance and inspiration, especially in the political realm. Why is this happening? What does it say about Protestants and our current political moment? These questions sparked a conversation with my friend Pete Wehner, columnist with The Atlantic and the New York Times, and frequent guest on Good Faith. If you are a Protestant or have some other religious affiliation, our conversation about the Pope's unique role will reveal to you important insights into today's political moment, including the need to address the quite obvious cognitive decline of our current president. If you are a Catholic, I think you also will benefit from hearing two admiring Protestants, hopefully helping you grasp how your spiritual leader is having an impact. Here's my conversation with Pete. Pete, welcome back to the Good Faith Podcast.
It's great to be with you, Curtis. It's always an interesting and rich conversation, so thanks for having me on.
All right, we're going to start with a quick check-in, Pete, because it's been a couple months since you and I talked, and I wanted to ask you, in these last few months, have you or have you not secretly converted to Catholicism?
All right. I've not secretly told people that there's a lot to recommend from Catholicism to people who are Protestants. I'll say that. I mean, I've long had a respect for Catholicism, Catholic tradition, but there are certain moments in life, public life, where the appeal is more than other times. And I'd say now it's one of the times where there's a real appeal to it.
So, Pete, I'm gathering from that answer, you still self-identify as a Protestant, broadly speaking?
Yeah, I do identify as a Protestant, broadly speaking. I've been, Protestant my entire life. I have not been particularly attached to denominations within my life. I'm just not really particularly wired that way. And I've probably been a bit of a border stalker when it comes to theology, a little eclectic in the way I construct my theology. But yes, I identify with the Protestant world for sure.
So do I, and I think I identify also with that lovely term of border stalking and sort of going here and there and not particularly attached to any denomination as well. So as Protestants, how are we being shaped by this current Pope, Pope Leo XIV?
I think we're being significantly shaped by him. I mean, I know that anecdotally, just from conversations that I have with people of the Protestant faith, others who are not even Christians, who are talking about him, about what he says, and most recently on the encyclical that he wrote dealing with the issue of artificial intelligence. Popes cast a large shadow over public life, certainly over public theology. I think in this case, there's the man himself, what he says, how he says it. But there's also the fact that he's an American pope. So, of course, for people within this country, that's going to carry an additional weight that hasn't ever happened before.
It strikes me that in a very short period of time, I mean, in the 1 year that he's been a pope, he's weighed in on a significant number of public policy issues. Which issues have really stood out to you as ones that he's weighed in on?
I would say immigration and the Iran war. Those are the two that come most immediately to mind. But then the encyclical, which came out a couple of weeks ago, on artificial intelligence, that's pretty significant. I mean, I read it. I host a book club monthly, and we talked about it. And so those are the ones that strike me as most immediate. I'd say AI is less politically wrought right
Yeah.
now than public policy issues like the Iran war and immigration. But yeah, I mean, he's been speaking out. It's tricky territory, as you know. Um, how do you speak out in a way that's responsible, that speaks to the moment but isn't captured by the moment,
Yeah.
and that retains some kind of distance, and certainly in a way that doesn't present you in a narrow partisan or ideological light. So when anybody weighs in on politics, who are figures of public faith, but especially a pope, those are that's a hard line to walk.
Yeah. I was doing some research aided by my producer, and boy, the list is long. I agree with you. The Iran war, immigration, and now AI really has been standout issues. But I was really struck at the list. I mean, there's the death penalty, which of course the Catholic tradition has weighed in on. Pro-life, of course, classic public issue that the popes have weighed in on. But he's covered climate, democracy. You could go on. Human trafficking. So it's quite striking. So I've been really interested, like, what is the actual political impact of this kind of involvement? And I want to ask you, as my favorite go-to guy on political insiderdom,
Yes.
because as listeners probably know, Pete served in 3 administrations, and especially you were an insider in the George W. Bush administration. You were his speechwriter, you were director of strategic initiatives, you were involved in policy. So dial back to your role in that particular administration.
Yeah.
And the Pope was John Paul II, which
Right.
was the Pope that actually overlapped all 3 of those administrations.
Exactly.
But specifically for your most insiderdom stint, did John Paul II ever really influence, enter in to what was happening in that inner circle?
Yeah, I would say that John Paul II was influential in people who were within the administration, myself included, Michael Gerson and others. He was such a significant, I mean, a really historically significant pope. For him, I would say the key moment, the key era was the end of the 70s and really the 80s. And the Polish Pope, the collapse of communism.
Right.
His encyclicals were extremely significant, and Centesimus Annus and others. And so he as a figure, how to approach issues, how to think about issues of Catholic social teaching as a prism through which to understand politics, culture, and matters of faith. I think that was probably the most significant influence that he had. Now, when we went to war with Iraq in early 2000s, 2003. The Pope was against that. It was a respectful difference, nothing like what you see today with Donald Trump and Pope Leo. Um, and you always take those, uh, you know, comments and criticisms and critiques seriously. But
Because you were pro that war, right? So
right.
you as a Christian are dealing with a Christian leader of international stature who's saying you're wrong.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And, it's not unprecedented, and there are other leaders, who are not religious leaders where you have to deal with those criticisms too, but they're legitimate. Now, normally you expect a pope to speak at for peace and against war. Now, that doesn't tell you any particular moment whether a war is a just war or not. Again, that gets back to Catholic social teaching of the criteria for just war. But I would say that get back to what I mentioned originally, I think just an approach toward public life, how to think about these issues, the moral gravity that the Pope brings, on these pronouncements. That I think for me and for Mike and for a number of other people within the White House, that was probably more significant than any single statement on any single issue.
Yeah. Well, that's a really interesting take on his impact on political insiders like you, like Gerson. Um, but I'm really struck by this Pope's influence at the mass
Right.
level of Protestants, including evangelicals.
Yeah.
You mentioned the book club that you're leading on Magnifica Humanitas, the Pope encyclical on artificial intelligence. I just saw a notice for a book club in my church. I've heard of others. In Protestant churches. It's really striking. How much do you think this attraction and attention among Protestants to the Pope is driven certainly by the specific issues, but really almost at a deeper level for this hunger for a statesman figure or stateswoman figure in the Protestant world, someone with genuine, respected leadership broadly across partisan lines? Because I don't see that person. There's no one like, say, Reinhold Niebuhr in the 50s and 60s, somebody who even appeared on the cover of Time as a spokesperson for Protestantism, or someone like Billy Graham in the 70s and 80s, who was a spiritual advisor to a number of presidents. I can't think of anybody even in recent decades. I think in recent decades, the closest I could come to was our mutual, friend and dearly departed Tim Keller, who I
Yeah.
think was just before his untimely death, just sort of getting there. But since Tim passed away, I can't think of anybody. Can you?
No, I can't. And I think you're homing in on something really, really important. I think there are, I don't know, several tributaries that are sort of coming into this river that we're talking about. One is that we've seen the collapse of evangelical public theology, really for about 50 years, so half a century. It's been the landscape's been pretty barren. There have been a few figures. Tim is certainly one of them, but if you think about the contributions of significant public intellectuals in evangelical and Protestant life, I mean, you named Niebuhr, but Reinhold and Richard Niebuhr. There was Barth, Wolfgang Pannenberg,
Pannenberg. We'll get it
Pannenberg,
right.
yeah,
Pannenberg, right? Yeah.
John Stott, Carl
Yes.
Henry, Mark Knoll, who's still alive, historian, and Rowan Williams, Anglican, N.T.
Yeah.
Wright, is still around, Oliver O'Donovan. I mean, there have been important figures, some of whom are still around, but the figure of a Bonhoeffer or a Niebuhr, they're just not around. And in terms of the evangelical fundamentalist world, since the late 70s and 80s, it's been defined by people like Falwell and Robertson and Dobson and the Moral Majority and the Christian Coalition and the progeny of those people. Yeah. And so it's not only that it's a barren landscape, it's an actively harmful landscape. Yeah. I think since she's doing a lot of damage to public life, to the Christian witness, and the depth of thought that goes into encyclicals and statements by the Pope, that is lacking. So that's one. The other one I would say is the unusual quality of the papal teachings. So the popes of the last 50 years, when you think about it, I mean, you mentioned John Paul II, Benedict, Francis, and now Leo. So they've produced thoughts and teachings of real intellectual and moral quality. Yeah. And that shines. So that shines in any era. I think it shines particularly in this era when Protestants have really nothing to compete with it.
I want to follow up on your comment about what's happening in the evangelical world, especially the white evangelical world, the conservative evangelical world. As our mutual friend David French has pointed out repeatedly, he says, look, Trump has influenced the evangelical church far more, like a bajillion times more than the evangelical world has influenced Trump. And so Trump really is in a very sort of disturbing way, the senior spiritual statesman of the evangelical world. And it's just deeply disturbing. I mean, you can have a good faith disagreement with Trump's specific policies, which, I would argue, and I think you would argue, are incoherent, are damaging, mostly personality driven by his own personal needs. Okay, we can debate that. But Trump as a spiritual statesman of Christianity, I mean, you can't really even have a good faith argument about that. I mean, just go to, 1 Timothy 3, Titus 1, which are, the biblical statements of the requirements of a spiritual leader of the church, of a spiritual influencer of the church. I mean, there's a long list there, but I think Trump fails pretty much every one. But just to, name a few: faithful to one's spouse, not quarrelsome, not quick-tempered, not greedy for money, not arrogant. There's no way Trump fulfills any of those requirements. So I guess we just don't have one, and we're in a bind. It almost seems like we're borrowing from Catholics a statesman that actually has that kind of spiritual authority. So I guess my question to you is in terms of how politics works.
Right.
Can Protestants actually exert moral influence in the political realm without such a statesman-like figure?
It's harder. I mean, one of the institutional advantages that Catholicism has that the Protestant world doesn't is the fact that they have a pope and Protestants don't, right? So there's no single individual who can approximate the authority, the influence that a pope has. So that's just an institutional, endemically institutional issue that Protestants have to compete with. It doesn't mean that, of course, Protestants can't influence public life politically, culturally, and otherwise. I mean, C.S. Lewis is, as you know, was on the cover of Time magazine, and I think Billy Graham was too. Now, Graham was in a very different category than Lewis. It may be true of Niebuhr as well. And I do think that Protestants, people of religious faith, at particular moments, they can say certain things, write certain books, offer certain insights that can really drive a conversation and put a frame around a conversation. But we really don't have that at all. And your point about Trump is an important one. I mean, I'd say a couple of caveats onto it or qualifiers on it. The first is this is complicated because, of course, we're electing a president, not a pope, as the saying goes. And so there's been a long debate about the moral influence of a president on a nation, and how do you judge if you're dealing a person, a political leader of average or below average moral qualities, but might be extremely good and on a range of issues and may even promote policies that you think advance the public good. So that can be.
Yeah, a lot of Democrats would argue that's how you should have viewed Bill Clinton, right?
Right. Well, that was the argument. Exactly. That was the argument that was used during the Clinton era. And as you know, almost all Republicans and certainly evangelicals and fundamentalists attacked Democrats on those grounds. And they said, no, the moral influence of a president is enormous. That's the
character matters. That was the line. Yeah,
exactly. And the Southern Baptist Convention passed an amendment, overture resolution, I guess, in 1998, which was directed against Bill Clinton, talked about the centrality of moral character, good moral character in presidents. Now they have Trump and they've jettisoned all of that. The other, qualifier would be that Trump has certainly accelerated all the worst tendencies within the evangelical and fundamentalist world, but he didn't appear ex nihilo. He was nominated in a primary where there were a lot of people that were stronger on a whole array of issues, conservative issues, and had been part of the Republican Party for much longer than Trump had. And that to me was a real indication that something had gone awry, because what it meant was that as far back as 2016, evangelicals had an alternative to Trump This was not a
Well,
binary.
name a couple of those alternatives, right?
Well, it was Marco Rubio and
Yeah.
Jeb Bush and John
Nikki
Kasich.
Haley, right?
I think Haley was later. She was in 2024.
Okay, that's right. Yeah, yeah,
In 2016, Ted Cruz was
yeah,
was in there. And there was pretty much any flavor ice cream you wanted. You could have gone with.
yeah,
And yet, in pretty overwhelming numbers, certainly strong numbers, evangelicals went with Trump. And if it wasn't based on his record as a Republican or his commitment to the pro-life cause or any of those other things, the question became, well, what was it? And what it was his ethic, the crudity, the cruelty, the aggression, the all of those combination of things appeal to them, and that's its own kind of interesting conversation. Once he won the nomination, certainly when he became president, that was when it was like Katie bar the door.
yeah,
And there was just no stopping it. Now, Trump himself has never presented himself particularly as a spiritual leader or a faith leader. He's visibly uncomfortable when he gets into matters of faith.
yeah.
If people ask him about the Bible, whether he likes the Old Testament or the New Testament, you could see his body language. So he doesn't present himself that way. The trouble
Well, he
is,
did cross that square. He's sold Bibles
yeah.
with his version of stamped on it.
No, that's true. I mean, the fact that he's trying to make money or that he's in a very cynical way using faith, I mean,
Yeah,
that's part of who he is. I just mean that I don't think even people I know who are evangelicals who like him would say that he's been somebody who's led with his faith, is conversant in faith, talks much about it. It's really the fact, I think he's viewed more as a Cyrus figure, from the Old Testament Persian king who was not himself Jewish, but helped save the Jewish people, and so he was a revered figure. And I think that was the model for a lot of evangelicals. It's really not one of us, but he's willing to fight for us, and he's willing to defend us, and he's willing to do to our enemies, the people we
yeah.
perceive as enemies, what maybe we would be comfortable doing, but we're really glad that he's doing it because he's going to really hurt them. He's going to defame them. He's going to make them suffer. And that appealed to a very dark passion, which I think a lot of Christians are uncomfortable admitting, owning up to. But that I think really is what was going on. And last thing I'll say on this, Curtis, is that the radiating effects of Trump, that Trumpian ethic, that Nietzschean ethic, that will to power ethic has had enormous impact on the evangelical and fundamentalist world. They've embraced it, they've imbibed it, they've patterned themselves after it. So without setting himself up as a spiritual or religious leader, he has kind of, set the playbook
Yeah.
for how they approach not just politics, but even internal discussions, intra-Christian, debates. And when Tim Keller, even near the end of Tim's life,
Yeah.
he was increasingly criticized, castigated because he approached things much like a pope, a third way.
Yeah.
He was not partisan. He was not captive to either side. The term winsome became a pejorative
Right.
as it related to Tim. So the effects of Trump can't be overstated.
Yeah, I think the death of winsomeness is so
Right.
crazy. I mean, and I
Yeah.
do think those who reject the ethos, and you're right, it's not an explicit spiritual claim, but it is a spiritual ethos.
Yeah.
And those who are rejecting that spiritual ethos of Trump, I think for me, anyways, there's a reason why I gravitate to this current pope, because that's how I want a public figure to speak, regardless of what position you take. That's the way you actually engage in the public square. I want to keep making this connection between Trump and the Pope, which you made very explicitly in an Atlantic article called "The American President versus the American
Now,
Pope." I want to do it in a kind of a historically circuitous route. And it actually was triggered by your most recent Atlantic piece called "The Apotheosis of Donald Trump." And after I read this, I said to myself, "Oh, Pete's going there. He's going there with the Mad King move." Because that's really, as I read it, was what you were saying,
right.
that Donald Trump was in the midst of a severe physical and mental decline,
Right.
and he was that was affecting his role as a president. And in
Yeah.
really what I would say, I don't know if you use this term, but like he's going mad. He's
Yeah.
he's losing it, right? Was that what you were trying to say?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, I was alluding to King Lear at the end,
Yeah.
kind of raging against the wind, raging into the night, and so the comparison was there. Yeah, I mean, I think we're in a really um, dangerous moment. I think that two things are happening with Donald Trump at the same time. One of which has been relative relatively consistent. The other one, which is relatively new. The consistent thing with Donald Trump has been the sociopathy, the narcissistic personality disorder, the disordered personality. I mean, we've seen that for his entire adult life. So that isn't new. And I went through in the essay and listed the things that I think any objective person would say are unchallengeable in terms of how they apply to Trump. But what is new is he's 80 years old now, and you can see the cognitive
Yeah.
decline, and you can see it in all sorts of ways. You can see it in his vocabulary and the sort of word salads that he has, the narrowing of the vocabulary, the use of certain kind of stock superlatives that he goes to. You see him getting up and wandering around during cabinet meetings and meetings with oil executives. You see it with the obsession with the ballroom. You see him going off on these tangents, which nobody can really quite make sense of. Uh, I mean, if we had been in this situation, 25 years ago, you just showed Donald Trump in action today, people would be shocked and horrified and concerned, and it would be so obvious, nobody would question it. But you become inured to some degree from these things. You become inured to the maliciousness and the malevolence of the man. But I think people have become somewhat inured as well to the cognitive decline. And of course, we saw that in a very different way with Joe Biden. This
Yeah.
is the problem of electing presidents when they turn 80 years old. There's a real decline. That's
Yeah.
just the nature of
It's going to happen to all of
life.
us.
I think I will say with Trump, somebody had told me that with the cognitive decline comparing Biden and Trump, the person told me that they were both themselves, but Biden became less himself as he got older, whereas Trump has become more himself as he's gotten older. And I do think what we're seeing now is the core Donald Trump, the man completely without filters, the man completely unmitigated, without any aides around him to try and protect him or to try and shield him. So this is essentially who he is. I don't think this is a secret for anybody. I mean, I've been ringing this bell since 2015 when he really entered this. Well, actually, even before then, but in a consistent way since 2015 when he came down the escalator. So to me, this has been pretty obvious, and it's not a surprise of how it's ending. But for a lot of people, it is a surprise, and it's a shock. And what is happening now that hasn't happened previously with Donald Trump is the crack up of the MAGA base, which had up to now been almost cult-like in its devotion.
So I want to keep tracing a route back here to the Pope, because that's what I want to connect the dots here. You ended that essay, The Apotheosis of Donald Trump, with a reference to a king going mad, King Lear. I thought of another actual historical reference. I thought of King George III, the Mad King. For those of you who want to know that story, you can watch a movie about this called The Madness of King George. Great work by Helen Mirren in that movie. There was a joke circulating around that very time, and I'll just read the joke, that was circulating around England at the popular level. The joke goes like this. When King George III went mad, the Archbishop of Canterbury kept talking to the king because he, the king, was the only person who could claim to be speaking to someone even higher up than himself. So if you don't get the punchline is the King George III was going so mad he was claiming to be God. That was like, if there was such a thing as an 18th century stand-up, that would be a common joke with a rim shot, or the equivalent of that. But there's several sober truths behind the reality that was a commonly circulated joke. One, to your point, the average Englishman knew about this cognitive decline and was talking about it. Like they weren't inured to it. They were actually, making it a public reality that they were speaking about to each other. The other sober truth is that institutions in that historical context were so much more capable of standing up to this kind of cognitive decline by a ruler. You had Parliament, their equivalent of Congress. They debated openly whether there should be a regent, right? A replacement that would stand in and rule on behalf of the king. And third, the best historical equivalent we Protestants have to the Pope, like in terms of official position, you might call the Archbishop of Canterbury as a candidate for that. And the Archbishop at that time in England was a man named John Moore, and he was involved. He was involved in the crisis of the madness of King George. He did not take a partisan policy position on that in public, but he was talking to political officials. He was actually talking to the king to assess his cognitive decline, and Parliament and parliamentary officials were asking the Archbishop for essentially his assessment of his capability. I mean, this is the king we're talking about, and we're now talking about supposedly in a Republican context, talking about a president, and yet we don't have the equivalent of public will to talk about this, of institutional will to confront this, and finally, a spiritual leader able to engage in this issue of the fitness, the mental fitness of the ruler. So we don't have that. Pete, what do we do? Like, what do we Protestants do? And I know you're especially have a heart for pastors in your network. Let's think about them. Let's think about the average Protestant, evangelical or otherwise, pastor. Okay, they can't weigh in like the Archbishop of Canterbury.
Yeah.
What can they do?
Yeah, I mean, as it relates to Trump and this moment, I mean, it's just limited in what can be done. Very specifically, I mean, the only way to deal with Trump, absent death or debilitating illness, is that if he's removed from office. That's really unlikely to happen. Would he himself remove himself from office? Again, that's unlikely, but depends in part on how much his decline accelerates, and how bad this gets. The Republican Party could conceivably have something to do with this. It's what happened with Richard Nixon, but it's a very different situation because Nixon was a party man through and through, and when he lost the support of Republicans, he felt like he had to leave. Trump has no institutional ties to the Republican Party, hardly any at all. So it would really have to be that you would get enough to, either to invoke the 22nd Amendment or impeach him and convict him. And we tried that once before, and it didn't happen. So I think we have to reconcile ourselves that the likelihood is that Donald Trump is going to be there for the rest of his term, again with the qualifiers in place. And there's no body that can go to him. That's just not his makeup. And anybody who challenged him remotely, let alone on something of this magnitude, would be thrown to the wolves. He would explode, and their careers would be over if they were Republicans and so forth. So, I think some of what's happening that's good is you've seen these, no king demonstrations. There was a really important moment that I think happened earlier this year in Minneapolis, when a lot of people, including pastors, including, mutual friends of ours like Mark Laverton, marched with other people of faith after the killings in Minneapolis, and that actually had an effect. And ICE backed off, and the administration's been much less aggressive with ICE since that moment. So I think those kinds of things can happen at key times, at key moments, to try and galvanize opposition in a way that can push things back. I do think, as it relates to pastors, people of faith, we've just now gotta play the long game. I mean,
Yeah.
it took a lot of time, a lot of decades to get in the mess that we're in, and I think we just have to begin to rethink our public theology, the role of churches, how we shape sensibilities. I mean, you and David French and Russell Moore have been doing that in a very concrete way with the after party, which I think is a very laudable effort. Those kind of things have to, have to happen. I just sent a note earlier today to a good friend of mine who's a senior pastor at an important church, based on a discussion that we had yesterday, where I was talking about beauty, and beauty is a theological category. And I was talking about how different traditions, different denominations foreground and background different things. For example, you may foreground human depravity and you may background imago Dei, and you can do it with word and sacrament. Yeah, you can do it with God's sovereignty and free will. Now we all have our tropisms, right? So we all kind of lean more into one than the other. But what was interesting to me is this idea, and he was interested in this too, which is what about thinking through both the concept of beauty as a theological category, which some really important figures, I mean, David Bentley Hart wrote a wonderful book called The Beauty of the Infinite in the early 2000s. But even if you go back to Reformed theology and people like Edwards and Calvin and others, beauty was pretty central to them. What about the cultivation of beauty within the church? What does that mean? And also just the immersive effect of aesthetic excellence. And I do think that there's no short-term solution to what's happened within Christian America and the evangelical world, the fundamentalist world. What we have to do is reshape the sensibilities, and that's a very, very long project. Sensibilities are deeper than beliefs in many
Right.
respects. Beliefs, I think, are often easier to change than the
Yeah.
sensibilities, and sensibilities, dispositions shape often what our beliefs and doctrines are. And so that's the kind of thing that I think we have to begin to think about, that it doesn't come at the expense of individuals at key moments speaking out on important issues.
Yeah.
But I think we have to at least two-track this.
I think it's really profound, Pete, because, when you were talking, I was almost imagining this hierarchy that would sort of run from president to positions to beliefs and to sensibilities. And I think we actually focus way more attention to that top of the hierarchy, or that construction of the hierarchy. And I think what you're saying is we actually have to invert it.
That's right.
That at least as pastors and congregations and individual Christians, that we probably really do, not probably, we do have very little influence on what's going to happen to the president and his cognitive decline and the positions people are going to take. And maybe we need to get to the base. Or if you think about a
Right.
hierarchy, actually what's most important is the base, and the base being sensibilities. I think is a really helpful construct. Or another way to say it is, we may not, as pastors or congregations or individual Christians, be able to influence the cognitive decline of a president, but we can influence the cultural decline that has been accelerated by the president. And in our own little sphere, in our own little corner of the
Yeah.
culture, we do have some responsibility and we do have some influence. And it's really interesting, I think, to think about beauty, because it's just viewed as a completely nonpartisan, even non-political issue, and yet a sensibility attuned to beauty will ultimately engage, I think, in the public square in a very different way.
Yeah, no, that's a very nice way to put it. There's a lovely line in a poem by Wordsworth, the prelude, "What we have loved, others will love, and we will teach them how." And one of the reasons I so like that line is that it's basically saying that you have the capacity in things that you fall in love with, to help other people to fall in love with them, as well. And, the transcendentals, the true, the good, the beautiful, I mean, those things, exist through all time. They're not subject to referendum. Sometimes we see them more clearly, sometimes we see them less clearly. What we do need is more people who love the good, the true, and the beautiful, and can help other peoples come to love them too. And it's not coercive; it's persuasive. It's the power of example. It's the power of the human life. It's a human life, the power of a human life, the beauty of a human life, the dignity of a human life, as an apologetic can't be refuted like an argument can,
Right.
because nobody's interested in refuting the power and the witness of an estimable human life. And that kind of thinking, those kind of conversations, I just don't think we've had enough of them within the
Yeah.
world you and I have been in, and I think we need more of them. And if we do, then there's the chance to be a witness to the world in the way that Jesus wanted us to.
I think that's important going back to our conversation about the Pope. I think that's an important lens on the influence of the Pope on Protestants and on evangelicals because like you said, it goes deeper than positions. It goes deeper than the rational intellect. Because I think many evangelicals have been trained to reject anything Catholic because they believe in papal infallibility on the idolization of Mary. Well, these are like rational intellectual positions that we can debate, but like you said, you can't refute sensibility
Right.
and that of the Pope, of the long line of popes, really, that show some deep spiritual discernment that these have been the popes, John Paul II, Benedict, now Pope Leo, that the consistent through line, in some ways deeper than even specific theological positions, is that sensibility. These are all men of deep spiritual moral character, of a sensibility that, like you said, you know, defies any rational argument against. So I
Yeah.
think that's really important.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say, as it relates to Pope Leo and President Trump, one of the things that intrigued me about it as I was watching, I could just feel myself kind of being drawn to it. It wasn't the nature of the disagreement, which is not unimportant, but I had the feeling that this was a dramatic, even archetypal it had a archetypal quality to it. Um, it was the contrast, one person completely secular, thoroughly of this age, a person who measures importance and success by wealth and power and sexual conquest and dominance, um, who said never ask God for forgiveness. And on the other hand, Leo, kind of mild-mannered, disciplined from the Augustinian tradition, the active contemplative nature of it, and the other thing that I noticed in that conflict that they had is that Leo not only stood up to Trump, but he transcended Trump. That is, you didn't get the sense that he was remotely afraid of Trump or that Trump could do anything. He wasn't angling for any promotion or for any favors. This was a person steeped in a tradition with the authority of a church worldwide, speaking out, unafraid, didn't get pulled down into the gutter with Trump,
Yeah.
spoke the way he would normally speak, with clarity, with directness, without anger, without antipathy. And I had the feeling as that unfolded that it was like Trump was uh, was throwing punches at shadows, and he just, it was just a different register.
Right.
And I thought that was an important thing to note, maybe even to
Yeah.
learn from.
I prefer he was throwing punches at the Holy Ghost. Um,
That's well, the Holy Ghost might throw punches back, so
Yeah. All right. Hey, listeners, if you're enjoying this conversation with Pete about how the Pope is really, in a very profound way, shaping American politics and even the politics of Protestants, I want to invite you to come back to our next conversation with Pete, where we're going to keep expanding the Catholic influence that really extends even beyond this specific Pope on Protestants, on American politics today.